Yo, Robert here from Body Fit Bootcamp in Dumfries and another episode of Body Fit Bootcamp TV. Today we are going to be talking about the skinny fat mode. A lot of you have heard this skinny fat mode, some of you might not have heard of it, so let me explain. Skinny fat is basically where you lose a lot of weight really quickly, but you still have a lot of either body fat still hanging on to you or some loose skin in areas. And if I can give you a classic example of that, you might have had a friend or a work colleague or a family member or whatever who's been on a diet or an extreme weight loss program where they're losing weight super quickly, not really focusing too much on the importance of certain training principles, just more on the extreme diet side of things from weight loss shakes and everything else, and they lose a weight a whole lot really quickly, and this saying nearly always comes up. Yeah, I'm doing great, but I just can't seem to get rid of this little bit. There's always somewhere. It's just this last little bit. Here's why this happens. When you do tons of cardio exercise, when you do loads of dieting, where you're not repairing your muscle tissue, your body basically cannibalizes itself. You go into what's called a catabolic state, which is the opposite of anabolic. Catabolic state. And that's basically where you're using your muscle tissue as energy. So you've utilised the carbs and the fat molecules and you've basically broke it down. So your body's kind of like at the empty gauge, if you like, in a fuel tank in a car. It's beyond that, and you've hit this catabolic stage. If you imagine a fuel tank in a car, so you've got empty and you've got full. When your fuel tank's full, if you put more fuel in it, obviously it'll just spill out onto the ground. With your body, it's different. When you hit the full, what it does is it stores the excess energy as body fat, so we become bigger and carry more body fat. The opposite, this is your fuel tank, and if you get to empty here, what happens? You run out of fuel after your reserve tank's obviously gone. When the orange light comes on, if you like, and then you run out. In your body, again, it's different because the human body is a whole lot more clever than a car. And what we have is we have this reserve tank, and down here, this is where you use your own muscle tissue, your own body as fuel, because the body's primary goal is survival. So if its primary goal is survival, it'll do whatever it can to use the stored body fat to use as energy, and then eventually when it's in a catabolic state, to use the muscle tissue as energy. And as usual, you can hear my dogs running about. I think every video that I do lately, my dogs are running about on the floor, they're having a fight as usual. But moving back to catabolic, that's what happens. So you start to use your muscle tissue to feed on. And this is why you get the skinny fat mode. When you combine cardio and resistance together, so whether it's body weight or weight training through dumbbells or kettlebells or barbells, whatever it may be, this is when you increase your lean muscle tissue. And when you increase your lean muscle tissue, it raises your metabolic rate and then in turn burns more body fat. And I read a brilliant analogy a long time ago, I can't remember where I read it, and I use it daily. It basically said that if you imagine your muscle tissue as a snake, and the bigger the snake, the more mice it eats, and the mice is the body fat, the fat is the mice. So the bigger the snake, the more it eats. Now I'm not necessarily talking in terms of being like a massive power lifter or strongman or anything else, just more lean muscle tissue. You can add quite a few pounds of lean muscle tissue in your body and you won't even see it. In fact, a lot of women who are focusing on toning, which is the cult word toning, that's actually building lean muscle tissue, but we just don't like to call it building because we're scared of bulking and getting big muscles and everything else. That doesn't happen. So you need to realise that you've got to add in resistance to stay away from this catabolic effect. Now, how you also stay away from the catabolic effect is by eating small and frequent meals with a lot of protein-based foods in your meals. This keeps you within the tank, if you like. It keeps you anywhere in this range, and it doesn't mean that you store too much and go here, and it doesn't mean that you end up going empty and burning muscle tissue. You're staying within the tank somewhere, and that's the secret, is just to stay within the parameters of full and empty, and ideally somewhere in the middle, depending on what you're doing, is ideal. If you're exercising, then obviously get it cranked up. If you're sitting watching EastEnders on the couch, then you can have it a whole lot lower, so you don't store a whole lot of body fat if you eat something. And that's pretty much the skinny fat mode. If I can give you an example of it, 200 metre 400 metre, 800 metre runner who runs round an athletics track, an athlete, they carry a bit of muscle tissue. Some are more muscular than others. They carry a little bit of muscle tissue, and they don't train for long periods of time. A lot of the time they train anaerobic and aerobic, so without oxygen, but most of the time they're doing a lot of weight bearing exercises because their time of their run is a whole lot less and a lot slower, or a lot faster rather. Whereas someone like a marathon runner, they're running for a longer, prolonged period of time. So the worst thing that they could possibly do is to do any weight training, because they want to simply be as light as possible. The muscles have to have some function, but it's not so much on generating a force to be able to sprint as such. It's more just about endurance, if you like. And that's kind of the examples. If you see like a marathon runner, you may beg to differ, but personally I don't think the marathon runner look is a great look. And again, that's generally speaking. There's some, I'm guessing, who maybe look okay, but statistically there's not that many marathon runners that look that great. There's a whole lot of 2, 4, 800 metres who look pretty decent if your goal is fat loss. And that's kind of the skinny fat mode. That's how to avoid it, and that's how to get to the point where you increase more lean muscle tissue, stop yourself going into this catabolic stage, and stop yourself going into overfeeding phase where you store as body fat. That's skinny fat. Speak to you all soon. Bye.